Good morning, grade 7s, and welcome back to WorksheetCloud and to your lesson for today. If you have any questions about today's lesson, you can email me at grade7@worksheetcloud.com. We are jumping into our lesson today, which is our reading lesson, Michael the Purga. I do hope you're enjoying it. We are going to start at chapter 16. So we ended off where Joey was in no man's land. From both sides of me, I heard a gradual crescendo of excitement and laughter rippling along the trenches, interspersed with barked orders that everyone was to keep their heads down and no one was to shoot. From my vantage point on the mound, I could see only an occasional glimpse of a steel helmet, my only evidence that the voices I was hearing did indeed belong to real people. There was a sweet smell of cooking food wafting towards me, and I lifted my nose to savor it. It was sweeter than the sweetest bran mash I had ever tasted, and it had a tinge of salt about it. I was drawn first one way and then the other by this promise of warm food, but each time I neared the trenches on either side, I met an impenetrable barrier of loosely coiled barbed wire. The soldiers cheered me on as I came closer, showing their heads fully now over the trenches and beckoning me towards them. And when I had to turn back at the wire and cross no man's land to the other side, I was welcomed again there by a chorus of whistling and clapping, but again I could find no way through the wire. I must have crisscrossed no man's land for much of that morning, and found at long last, in the middle of this blasted wilderness, a small patch of coarse, dank grass, growing on the lip of an old crater. I was busying myself at tearing the last of this away when I saw, out of the corner of my eye, a man in a grey uniform clamber up out of the trenches, waving a white flag above his head. I looked up as he began to clip his way methodically through the wire and then pull it aside. All this time there was much argument and noisy consternation from the other side, and soon a small helmeted figure in a flapping khaki grey coat climbed up into no man's land. He too held up a white handkerchief in one hand and began also to work his way through the wire towards me. The German was through the wire first, leaving a narrow gap behind him. He approached me slowly across no man's land, calling out to me all the while as he came towards me. He reminded me at once of dear old Frederick, for he was, like Frederick, a grey-haired man in an untidy, unbuttoned uniform, and he spoke gently to me. In one hand he held a rope, the other hand he stretched out towards me. He was still too far away from me for me to see clearly, but an offered hand, in my experience, was often cupped, and there was enough promise in that for me to limp cautiously towards him. On both sides the trenches were lined now with cheering men, standing on the parapets, waving their helmets above their heads. "Oi, boyo!" The shout came from behind me, and was urgent enough to stop me. I turned to see the small man in khaki weaving and jinking his way across no man's land, one hand held high above his head, carrying the white handkerchief. "Oi, boyo! Where are you going? Hang on a bit. You're going the wrong way, see?" The two men who were coming towards me could not have been more different. The one in grey was the taller of the two, and as he came nearer, I could see his face was lined and creased with years. Everything about him was slow and gentle under his ill-fitting uniform. He wore no helmet, but instead the peakless cap with the red band I knew so well, sitting carelessly on the back of his head. The little man in khaki reached us, out of breath, his face red and still smooth with youth, his round helmet with the broad rim fallen askew over one ear. For a few strained, silent moments, the two stood yards apart from each other, eyeing one another warily and saying not a word. It was the young man in khaki who broke the silence and spoke first. "Now what do we do?" he said, walking towards us and looking at the German, who stood head and shoulders above him. "There's two of us here, and one horse to split between us." course, King Solomon had the answer, didn't he now? But it's not very practical in this case, is it? And what's worse, I can't speak a word of German, and I can see you can't understand what the hell I'm talking about, can you? Right, if you don't know the story of King Solomon, he had two women who came to him. They had both given birth to a baby, but the one woman had woken up and her baby had died in the night. And so what she did was, while everyone was sleeping, she swapped her dead baby with the other lady's baby. And so when they woke up in the morning, the mother of the baby who was alive woke up and found this dead baby and said, "It's not mine." But the other lady said, "No, I've got my baby, that's yours." Anyway, they had to go to King Solomon. This is a story in the Bible. And King Solomon said, "Okay, bring the baby to me." And he was apparently the wisest king of all time. And what he did was he brought the two women to himself and he said, "Bring the baby." So they brought the baby and he said, "Okay, well, what's the story?" One said, "No, this is my baby." The other one said, "No, it's actually mine." And he said, "Well, it can't be both of yours." And she said, "I know my baby. This is mine. Mine is not the dead baby." Anyway, King Solomon said, "Okay, I'll tell you what." He asked one of his guards to bring a sword, and he said, "I'm going to cut the baby in half, and then you can each have half." To which the real mom said, No, please don't kill the baby. The other lady can have the baby." To which, obviously, if you realize, the real mother would have spared the baby's life and given it to somebody else. And so she was revealed as the real mother and got her baby back. So there they are standing and they're saying, is this, sort of like King Solomon where we have to cut the horse in half, which isn't going to help anyone. So that's not practical. Oh, hell, I should never have come out here. I knew I shouldn't. Can't think what came over me, and all for a muddy old horse, too. But I can speak a little bad English, said the older man, still holding out his cupped hand under my nose. It was full of black bread broken into pieces, a titbit I was familiar enough with, but usually found too bitter for my taste. However, I was now too hungry to be choosy, and as he was speaking, I soon emptied his hand. Hey, this is my little Pepsi. Wants to listen to a story. Come here. Right. I was too hungry to be choosy, and as he was speaking, I soon emptied his hand. I speak only a little English, like a schoolboy, but it's enough, I think, for us. And even as he spoke, I felt a rope slip slowly around my neck and tighten. As for our other problem, since I have been here the first, then the horse is mine. Fair, no? Like your cricket? Cricket, said the young man. Who's ever heard of that barbarous game in Wales? That's a game for the rotten English. Rugby, that's my game. And that's not a game. That's a religion, that is, where I come from. I played scrum half before the war stopped me, and we say that a loose ball is our ball. Sorry, said the German, his eyes furrowed with concern. I cannot understand what you mean by this. Doesn't matter, Jerry. Not important. Not anymore. We could have settled all this peaceful like, Jerry. The war, I mean. And I'd be back in my valley, and you'd be back in yours. Still, not your fault, I don't suppose. Neither mine. Come to that. By now the cheering from both sides had subsided, and both armies looked on in total silence as the two men talked together beside me. The Welshman was stroking my nose and feeling my ears. You know horses, then? Said the tall German. How bad is his wounded leg? Is it broken, do you think? He seems not to walk on it. The Welshman bent over and lifted my leg gently and expertly, wiping away the mud from around the wound. He's in a mess right enough, but I don't think it's broken, Jerry. It's a bad wound, though, a deep gash. Wire, by the look of it. Got to get him seen to quick, else the poison will set in, and then there won't be a lot anyone could do for him. Cut like that? He must have lost a lot of blood already. Question is, though, who takes him? We've got a vet hospital somewhere back behind our lines that could take care of him, but I expect you've got one too. Yes, I think so. Somewhere it must be, but I do not know exactly where, the German said slowly. And then he dug deep in his pocket and produced a coin. You choose the side you want, head or tail, I think you say. I will show the coin to everyone on both sides, and everyone will know that whichever side wins the horse, it is only by chance. Then no one loses any pride, yes? And everyone will be happy. The Welshman looked up and smiled. All right then, you go ahead, Jerry. You show them the coin, and then you toss, and I'll call. The German held the coin up in the sun, and then turned a full, slow circle before spinning it high and glinting into the air. As it fell to the ground, the Welshman called out in a loud, resonant voice, so that all the world could hear. Heads! Well, said the German, stooping to pick it up, that's the face of my Kaiser looking up at me out of the mud, and he does not look pleased with me. So I'm afraid you have won. The horse is yours. Take good care of him, my friend. And he picked up the rope again and handed it to the Welshman. As he did so, he held out his other hand in a gesture of friendship and reconciliation, a smile lighting his worn face. In an hour, maybe, or two, he said, we will be trying our best again, each other to kill. God only knows why we do it, and I think he has maybe forgotten why. Goodbye, Welshman. We have shown them, haven't we? We have shown them that any problem can be solved between people, if only they can trust each other. That is all it needs, no? The little Welshman shook his head in disbelief as he took the rope. Jerry, Boyle, I think if they would let you and me have an hour or two out here together, we could sort out this whole wretched mess. There would be no more weeping widows and crying children in my valley, and no more in yours. If the worst came to the worst, we could decide it all on the flip of a coin, couldn't we now? If we did, said the German with a chuckle, if we did it that way, then it would turn out to win, and maybe your Lord George would not like that. And he put his hand on the Welshman's shoulders for a moment. Take care, my friend, and good luck. Och, Wiedersehen. Some German. I'm not very good, guys, you can hear. And he turned away and walked slowly back across no man's land to the wire. Same to you, Boyle, the Welshman shouted after him. And then he too turned and led me away back towards the line of khaki soldiers, who began now to laugh and cheer with delight as I limped towards them through the gap in the wire. Chapter 17. It was only with the greatest difficulty that I stayed standing on my 3 good legs in the vet wagon that carried me that morning away from the heroic little Welshman who had brought me in. A milling crowd of soldiers surrounded me to cheer me on my way, but out on the long rattling roads I was very soon shaken off my balance and fell in an ungainly, uncomfortable heap on the floor of the wagon. My injured leg throbbed terribly as the wagon rocked from side to side on its slow journey away from the battlefront. The wagon was drawn by 2 stocky black horses, both well groomed out and immaculate in well-oiled harness. Weakened by long hours of pain and starvation, I had not the strength even to get to my feet when I felt the wheels below me running at last on smooth cobbled stones, and the wagon came to a jerking standstill in the warm, pale autumn sunshine. My arrival was greeted by a chorus of excited neighing, and I raised my head to look. I could just see over the sideboards a wide, cobbled courtyard with magnificent stables on either side, and a great house with turrets beyond. Over every stable door were the heads of inquisitive horses, ears pricked. There were men in khaki walking everywhere, and a few were running now towards me, one of them carrying a rope halter. Unloading was painful, for I had little strength left and my legs had gone numb after the long journey. But they got me to my feet and walked me backwards gently down the ramp. I found myself the centre of anxious and admiring attention in the middle of the courtyard, surrounded by a cluster of soldiers who inspected every part of me, feeling me all over. What in thunder do you think you're about, you lot? came a booming voice echoing across the courtyard. It's an horse. It's an horse, just like the others. A huge man was striding towards us, his boots crisp on the cobbles. His heavy red face was half hidden by the shade of his peaked cap that almost touched his nose, and by a ginger moustache that spread upwards from his lips to his ear. It may be a famous horse. It may be the only thundering horse in the old thundering world brought in alive from no man's land, but it is only an horse, and a dirty horse at that. I've had some rough-looking specimens brought in here in my time, but this is the scruffiest, dirtiest, muddiest horse I've ever seen. He's a thundering disgrace, and you all stood about looking at him. He wore 3 broad stripes on his arm, and the creases in his immaculate khaki uniform were razor sharp. Now, there's 100 or more sick horses here in this hospital, and there's just 12 of us to look after them. So his accent omits the H. There's a young layabout was detailed to look after this one when he arrived, so the rest of you blighters can get back to your duties. Move it, you idle monkeys, move it. And the men scattered in all directions, leaving me with a young soldier who began to lead me away towards a stable. And you, came that booming voice again. Major Martin will be down from the house in 10 minutes to examine that horse. Make sure that horse is so thundering clean and thundering shiny, so as you could use him as a shaving mirror, right? Yes, Sergeant, came the reply. A reply that sent a sudden shiver of recognition through me. Quite where I'd heard the voice before I did not know. I knew only that those 2 words sent a tremor of joy and hope and expectation through my body and warmed me from the inside out. He led me slowly across the cobbles, and I tried all the while to see his face better, but he kept just that much ahead of me, so that all I could see was a neatly shaven neck and a pair of pink ears. How the devil did you get yourself stuck out there in no man's land, you old silly, he said. That's what everyone wants to know, ever since the message came back that they're bringing you in here. And how the devil did you get yourself in such a state? I swear there's not an inch of you that isn't covered in mud or blood. Job to tell what you look like under all that mess. Still, we'll soon see. I'll tie you up here and get the worst of it off in the open air. Then I'll brush you up in the proper manner before the officer gets here. Come on, you silly you. Once I've got you cleaned up, then the officer can see you, and he'll tidy up the nasty cut of yours. Can't give you food, I'm sorry to say, nor any water. Not till he says so. That's what the sergeant told me. That's just in case they have to operate on you. And the way he whistled as he cleaned out the brushes was the whistle that went with a voice I knew. It confirmed my rising hopes, and I knew then that I could not be mistaken. In my overwhelming delight, I reared up on my back legs and cried out to him to recognize him. I wanted to make him see who I was. Hey, careful there, you silly. Nearly had my hat off, he said gently, keeping a firm hold on the rope and smoothing my nose as he always had done whenever I was unhappy. No need for that. You'll be all right. Lots of fuss about nothing. Knew a young horse once just like you. Proper jumpy he was, till I got to know him, and he got to know me. You talking to them horses again, Albert? Came a voice from inside the next stable. God, strength. What makes you think they understand a perishing word you say? Some of them may not, David, said Albert. But one day one of them will. He'll come in here and he'll recognize my voice. He's bound to come in here. And then you'll see a horse that understands every word that's said to him. You're not on about your Joey again. The head that came with the voice leant over the stable door. Won't you never give it up, Bertie? I've told you before, if I've told you 1,000 times. They say there's near 500,000 ruddy horses out there, and you joined the vet corps just on the off chance you might come across him. I pawed the ground with my bad leg in an effort to make Albert look at me more closely, but he just patted my neck and set to work cleaning me up. There's just one chance in 500,000 that your Joey walks in here. You've got to be more realistic. He could be dead. A lot of them are. He could have gone off to ruddy Palestine with the yeomanry. He could be anywhere along hundreds of miles of trenches. If you weren't so ruddy good with horses, and if you weren't the best friend I had, I think you'd gone a bit screwy the way you go on about your Joey. You'll understand why when you see him, David. Albert said, crouching down to scrape the caked mud off my underside. You'll see. There's no horse like him anywhere in the whole world. He's a bright red bay with a black mane and tail. He has a white cross on his forehead and 4 white socks that are all even to the last inches. He stands over 16 hands and he's perfect from head to toe. I can tell you that when you see him, you'll know. I could pick him out of a crowd of 1,000 horses. There's just something about him. Captain Nichols, you know, him that's dead now, the one I told you about that brought Joey from my father, him that sent me Joey's picture, he knew it. He saw it the first time he set eyes on him. I'll find him, David. That's what I came all this way for, and I'm going to find him. Either I'll find him, or he'll find me. I told you, I made him a promise, and I'm going to keep it. You're round the ruddy twist, Bertie, said his friend, opening a stable door and coming over to examine my leg. Round the ruddy twist, that's all I can say. He picked up my hoof and lifted it gently. This one's got a white sock on his front legs anyway. That's as far as I can tell under all this blood and mud. I'll just sponge the wound away a bit, clean it up for you whilst I'm here. You'll never get this one cleaned up in time, else. And I've finished mucking out my ruddy stables. Not a lot to do, and it looks as if you could do with a hand. Old Sergeant Thunder won't mind, not if I've done all he told me, and I have. The 2 men worked tirelessly on me, scraping and brushing and washing. I stood quite still, trying only to nuzzle Albert to make him turn and look at me, but he was busy at my tail and my hind quarters now. 3, said his friend, washing off another of my hooves. That's 3 white socks. Turn it up, David, said Albert. I know what you think. I know everyone thinks I'll never find him. There's thousands of army horses with 4 white socks. I know that. But there's only one with a blaze in the shape of a cross on the forehead. And how many horses shine red like fire in the evening sun? I tell you, there's not another one like him, not in the whole wide world. 4, said David. That's 4 legs and 4 white socks. Only the cross on the forehead now, and a splash of red paint on this muddy mess of a horse, and you'll have your Joey standing here. Don't tease, said Albert quietly. Don't tease, David. You know how serious I am about Joey. It'll mean all the world to me to find him again. Only friend I ever had afore I came to the war. I told you. I grew up with him, I did. Only creature on this earth I felt any kingship for. David was standing now by my head. He lifted my mane and brushed gently at first, then vigorously at my forehead, blowing the dust away from my eyes. He peered closely and then set again, brushing down towards the end of my nose and up again between my ears, till I tossed my head with impatience. Bertie, he said quietly, I'm not teasing, honest, I'm not now. You said your Joey had 4 white socks, all even to the inch, right? Right, said Albert, still brushing away at my tail. And you said Joey had a white cross on his forehead? Right, Albert said, completely disinterested. Now I have never ever seen a horse like that, Bertie, said David, using his hand to smooth down the hair on my forehead. Wouldn't have thought it possible. Well, it is, I tell you, said Albert sharply, and he was red, flaming red in the sunlight, like I said. I wouldn't have thought it possible, his friend went on, keeping his voice in check. Not until now, that is. Oh, pack it in, David, Albert said, and there was a genuine irritation in his voice now. I've told you, haven't I? I told you I'm serious about Joey. So am I, Bertie, dead serious, no messing, I'm serious. This horse has 4 white socks, all evenly marked like you said. This horse has a clear white cross on his head. This horse, as you can see for yourself, has a black mane and tail. This horse stands over 16 hands, and when he's cleaned up, he'll look pretty as a picture. And this horse is a red bay under all that mud, just like you said, Bertie. As David was speaking, Albert suddenly dropped my tail and moved slowly around me, running his hand along my back. Then at last we stood facing one another. There was a rougher hue to his face, I thought. He had more lines around his eyes, and he was a broader, bigger man in his uniform than I remembered. But he was my Albert, and there was no doubt about it. He was my Albert. Joey, he said tentatively, looking into my eyes. Joey. I tossed my head and called out to him in my happiness, so that the sound echoed around the yard and brought horses and men to the door of their stables. It could be, said Albert quietly. You're right, David, it could be him. It sounds like him even, but there's one way I know to be sure." And he untied my rope and pulled the halter off my head. Then he turned and walked away to the gate before facing me, cupping his hands to his lips and whistling. It was his owl whistle, the same low, stuttering whistle he had used to call me when we were walking out together back at home on the farm all those years before. Suddenly there was no longer any pain in my leg, and I trotted easily over towards him and buried my nose in his shoulder. "It's him, David," Albert said, putting his arms around my neck and hanging on to my mane. "It's my Joey. I found him. He's come back to me just like I said he would." "See?" said David wryly. "What did I tell you? See? Not often wrong, am I?" "Not often," Albert said. "Not often. And not this time." Wow. So that's the end of chapter 17. I think we'll just squeeze in chapter 18 before we go. In the euphoric days that followed our reunion, the nightmare I had lived through seemed to fade into unreality. And the war itself was suddenly 1,000,000 miles away and of no consequence. At last there were no guns to be heard, and the only vivid reminder that suffering and conflict was still going on were the regular arrivals of the vet wagons from the front. Major Martin cleaned my wound and stitched it up, and though at first I could still put little weight on it, I felt in myself stronger with every day that passed. Albert was with me again, and that in itself was medicine enough. But properly fed once more, with warm mash every morning and a never-ending supply of sweet-scented hay, my recovery seemed only a matter of time. Albert, like the other vet orderlies, had many other horses to care for, but he would spend every spare minute he could fussing over me in the stable. To the other soldiers, I was something of a celebrity, so I was scarcely ever left alone in my stable. There always seemed to be one or two faces looking admiringly over my door. Even Old Thunder, as they called the sergeant, would inspect me overzealously, and when the others were not about, he would fondle my ears and tickle me under my throat, saying, "Quite a boy, aren't you? Thundering fine horse if ever I saw one. You get better now. Do you hear me?" But time passed, and I did not get better. One morning I found myself quite unable to finish my mash, and every sharp sound, like the kick of a bucket or the rattle of the bolt on the stable door, seemed to set me on edge and made me suddenly tense from head to tail. My forelegs in particular would not work as they should. They were stiff and tired, and I felt a great weight of pain all along my spine, creeping into my neck and even my face. Albert noticed something was wrong when he saw the mash I'd left in the bucket. "What's the matter with you, Joey?" he said anxiously, and he reached out his hand to stroke me in the way he often did when he was concerned. Even the sight of his hand coming towards me, normally a welcome sign of affection, struck an alarm in me, and I backed away from him into the corner of the stable. As I did so, I found that the stiffness in my front legs would hardly allow me to move. I stumbled backwards, falling against the brick wall at the back of the stable, and leaning there heavily. "Thought something was wrong yesterday," said Albert, standing still now in the middle of the stable. "Thought you were a bit off colour then. Your back's as stiff as a board, and you're covered in sweat. What the devil have you been up to, you old silly?" He moved slowly now towards me, and although his touch still sent an irritational tremor of fear through me, I stood my ground and allowed him to stroke me. "Perhaps it was something you picked up on your travels. Perhaps you ate something poisonous. Isn't that it? But then that would have shown itself before now, surely." "You'll be fine, Joey, but I'll go and fetch Major Martin just in case. He'll look you over, and if there's anything wrong, put you right quick as a Twix, as my father used to say. Wonder what he would think now if he could see us together. He never believed I'd find you either. Said I was a fool to go. Said it was a fool's errand, and that I'd like to get myself killed in the process. But he was a different man, Joey, after you left. He knew he'd done wrong, and that seemed to take all the nastiness out of him. He seemed to live only to make up for what he'd done. He stopped his Tuesday drinking sessions, looked after Mother as he used to do when I was little, and he even began to treat me right. Didn't treat me like a workhorse anymore. I knew from the soft tone of his voice that he was trying to calm me, as he had done all those years ago when I was a wild and frightened colt. Then his words had soothed me, but now I could not stop myself from trembling. Every nerve in my body seemed to be taut, and I was breathing heavily. Every fibre of me was consumed by a total, inexplicable sense of fear and dread. "I'll be back in a minute, Joey," he said. "Don't you worry. You'll be all right. Major Martin will fix you. He's a miracle with horses, is that man." And he backed away from me and went out. It was not long before he was back again with his friend, David, with Major Martin and Sergeant Thunder. But only Major Martin came inside the stable to examine me. The others leaned over the stable door and watched. He approached me cautiously, crouching down by my foreleg to examine my wound. Then he ran his hands all over me from my ears, down my back to my tail, before standing back to survey me from the other side of the stable. He was shaking his head ruefully as he turned to speak to the others. "What do you think, Sergeant?" he asked. "Same as you. From the look of him, sir," said Sergeant Thunder, "is standing there like a block of wood, tail stuck out, can't hardly move his head. Not much doubt about it, is there, sir?" "None," said Major Martin. "None whatsoever. We've had a lot of it out here. If it isn't confounded rusty barbed wire, then it's shrapnel wounds. One little fragment left inside, one cut, that's all it takes. I've seen it time and again." "I'm sorry, my lad," the Major said, putting his hand on Albert's shoulder to console him. "I know how much this horse means to you, but there's precious little we can do for him, not in his condition." "What do you mean, sir?" Albert asked, a tremor in his voice. How do you mean, sir? What's the matter with him, sir? Can't be a lot wrong, can there? He was right as rain yesterday, except he wasn't finishing his feed. Little stiff, perhaps, but otherwise right as rain he was." "It's tetanus, son," said Sergeant Thunder. "Lockjaw, they calls it. It's written all over him. That wound of his must have festered afore we got him here. And once a horse has tetanus, there's very little chance, very little indeed." "Best to end it quickly," Major Martin said. "No point in an animal suffering. Better for him, and better for you." "No, sir," Albert protested, still incredulous. "No, you can't, sir, not with Joey. We must try something. There must be something you can do. You can't just give up, sir. You can't. Not with Joey." David spoke up now in support. "Begging your pardon, sir," he said, "but I remembers you telling us when we first came here that a horse's life is perhaps even more important than a man's, 'cause a horse hasn't got no evil in him, excepting any that's put there by men. I remembers you saying that our job in the vet corps was to work night and day, 26 hours a day if need be, to save and help every horse that we could, that every horse was valuable in himself and valuable to the war effort. No horse, no guns. No horse, no ammunition. No horse, no cavalry. No horse, no ambulances. No horse, no water for the troops at the front line. Lifeline of the whole army, you said, sir. We must never give up, you said, because where there's life, there's still hope. That's all what you said, sir, begging your pardon, sir." "You watch your lips, son," said Sergeant Thunder sharply. "There's no way to speak to an officer. If the Major here thought there was a chance in a million of saving this poor animal, he'd have cracked at it. Wouldn't you, sir? Isn't that right, sir?" Major Martin looked hard at Sergeant Thunder, taking his meaning, and then nodded slowly. "All right, Sergeant, you made your point. Of course there's a chance," he said carefully. "But if once we start with a case of tetanus, then it's a full-time job for one man for a month or more, and even then the horse has hardly more than a chance in 1,000, if that." "Please, sir," Albert pleaded, "please, sir, I'll do it all, sir, and I'll fit in my other horses too, sir, honest I would, sir." "And I'll help him, sir," David said. "All the lads will. I know they will. You see, sir, that Joey's a bit special for everyone here, what with his being Bertie's old horse back home and all." "That's the spirit, son," said Sergeant Thunder. "And it's true, sir. There is something a bit special about this one, you know, after all he's been through. With your permission, sir, I think we ought to give him that chance. You have my personal guarantee, sir, that no other horse will be neglected. Stables will be run ship-shape and Bristol fashion, like always." Major Martin put his hands on the stable door. "Right, Sergeant," he said, "you're on. I like a challenge as well as the next man. I want a sling rigged up in here. This horse must not be allowed to get off his legs. Once he's down, he'll never get up again. I want a note added to standing orders, Sergeant, that no one's to talk in anything but a whisper in this yard. He won't like any noise, not with tetanus. I want a bed of short, clean straw and fresh every day. I want the windows covered so that he's kept always in the dark. He's not to be fed any hay, he could choke on it. Just milk and oatmeal gruel. And it's going to get worse before it gets better, if it does. He'll find his mouth will lock tighter as the days go by, but he must go on feeding and he must drink. If he doesn't, then he'll die. I want a 24-hour watch on this horse. That means a man posted in here all day and every day. Clear? Yes, sir, said Sergeant Thunder, smiling broadly under his moustache. And if I may say so, sir, I think you've made a very wise decision. I'll see to it, sir. Now, look lively, you two layabouts. You heard what the officer said. That same day a sling was strung up around me, and my weight supported from the beams above. Major Martin opened my wound again, cleaned it, and cauterized it. He returned every few hours after that to examine me. It was Albert, of course, who stayed with me most of the time, holding up the bucket to my mouth so that I could suck in the warm milk or gruel. At nights, David and he slept side by side in the corner of the stable, taking turns to watch me. As I had come to expect, and as I needed, Albert talked to me all he could to comfort me, until sheer fatigue drove him back into his corner to sleep. He talked much of his father and mother, and about the farm. He talked of a girl he had been seeing up in the village for a few months before he left for France. She didn't know anything about horses, he said, but that was only her fault. The days passed slowly and painfully for me. The stiffness in my front legs spread to my back and intensified. My appetite was becoming more limited each day, and I could scarcely summon the energy or enthusiasm to suck in the food I knew I needed to stay alive. In the darkest days of my illness, when I felt sure enough each day might be my last, only Albert's constant presence kept alive in me the will to live. His devotion, his unwavering faith that I would indeed recover, gave me the heart to go on. All around me I had friends, David and all the vet orderlies, Sergeant Thunder and Major Martin. They were all a source of great encouragement to me. I knew how desperately they were willing me to live, although I often wondered whether they wanted it for me or for Albert, for I knew they held him in such high esteem. But on reflection, I think perhaps they cared for both of us, as if we were their brothers. Then one winter's night, after long painful weeks in the sling, I felt a sudden looseness in my throat and neck, so much so that I could call out, albeit softly for the first time. Albert was sitting in the corner of the stable as usual, with his back against the wall, his knees drawn up and his elbows resting on his knees. His eyes were closed, so I nickered again softly, but it was loud enough to wake him. "Was that you, Joey?" he asked, pulling himself to his feet. "Was that you, you old silly? Do it again, Joey. I might have been dreaming. Do it again." So I did, and in so doing I lifted my head for the first time in weeks and shook it. David heard it too and was on his feet and shouting over the stable door for everyone to come. Within minutes the stable was full of excited soldiers. Sergeant Thunder pushed his way through and stood before me. "Standing orders says whisper," he said. And that was no thundering whisper. I heard, "What's up? What's all that hullabaloo?" "He moved, Sarge," Albert said. His head moved easily and he neighed. "Course he did." "Son," said Sergeant Thunder, "course he did. He's going to make it, like I said he would. I always told you he wouldn't, didn't I? And have any of you layabouts ever known me to be wrong? Well, have you?" "Never, Sarge," said Albert, grinning from ear to ear. "He's getting better, isn't he, Sarge? I'm not just imagining it, am I?" "No, son," said Sergeant Thunder. "Your Joey's going to be all right by the looks of him, long as we keep him quiet and so long as we don't rush him. I just hopes that if I'm ever poorly, I have nurses around me that looks after me like you have this horse. One thing, though, looking at you, I'd like them to be a whole lot prettier." Shortly after, I found my legs again, and then the stiffness left my back forever. They took me out of the sling and walked me one spring morning out into the sunshine of the cobbled yard. It was a triumphant parade, with Albert leading me carefully, walking backwards and talking to me all the while. "You've done it, Joey. You've done it. Everyone says the war's going to be over quite soon. I know we've been saying that for a long time, but I feel it in my bones this time. It'll be finished before long, and then we'll both be going home, back to the farm. I can't wait to see the look on Father's face when I bring you back up the lane. I just can't wait. What a lovely way to end our reading this morning. And I do hope, guys, that you've enjoyed it. Let me just move myself out the way here again. Yes, what a lovely way to end. So just remember, if you've got any questions, you can email me at grade7@worksheetcloud.com, and then there will be an activity for you to do once you close this video. So nothing more from me, just to say thanks for watching, grade 7s. This lesson was brought to you by Worksheet Cloud, and I will see you soon. Same time, same place. Bye, everybody.